Sorry, Aaron, should we take roll at least to recognize everyone who is here?
Yeah, absolutely. How do we want to go about that?
You can just simply say their names and they say it here.
Okay. So I'm Aaron Boyle with Facilities Development. Josh.
Here.
Josh Gamus.
Present.
John Irwin.
Here.
Eric Simpson.
Here.
And I'm just going in the order on my screen here. So it says Janet, but I know it's Dick Harburn.
Here.
Carl.
Here.
Renew.
Here.
Cheryl.
Here.
Brad.
Here.
Brian.
Here.
David.
Here.
Tom. Frank.
Here.
Steve.
Present.
Anne.
I'm here.
And Prashant.
Present.
Okay, great. All right, I will go ahead and open up the slideshow here. So we just put the agenda for tonight right here on the slideshow. Normally we have the one that I sent out. It's all just formatted here. So Josh, do you want to address the comments?
Yep, just for the record, we put out a notification on our district website that we are having the Bond Accountability Committee meeting, and if there are any comments from the public, did not receive any comments for this meeting.
Next, we will go to Mr. John Irwin and get the monthly financial reports. Okay. Did the financial report pop up here?
Yeah.
Very cool.
All right. Aaron, you might want to zoom in a little bit. Awesome. Good evening, everybody. So we had some big movement this month, but nothing that was a surprise. The first big thing to talk about is that the overall program reserve decreased by 14 million, and the reserve plus project contingencies decreased by 14 million. And the big reason for that was an item that this committee helped out a lot with. We had presented to y'all going all the way back to last, I think May or April, about the district-wide facility repairs project and how we were looking at a $25 million increase to that project. And we did the first part of that budget increase last June. And then we came to this committee again a couple months ago and asked for your recommendation in doing part 2 of that budget transfer. And that part 2 of that transfer was approved at the March school board meeting on March 15th. And so that decreased our program reserve, but it was a change that we've been talking about and looking forward to for quite a while. I keep joking with Aaron, I don't know what I'm going to work on now, because that was the district-wide facility repairs was my baby for the last couple of years. So I'm very happy to see that second part of that budget increase happen. And this will be the final part of that initial $25 million ask. And so our total budget for that project now matches our projections. And then the second bullet there is that we once again, we came to the committee talking about Raleigh Hills and asking to allocate 1 million of the Raleigh Hills budget hold that we had in order to begin conceptual design on what would be a new Raleigh Hills school building. And so once again, we brought that to this committee, and you guys gave us your recommendation, and we took that to the school board, and that was also approved at the March 15th meeting. So because that money wasn't part of the program reserve, it didn't alter any of our lines or alter the program reserve, but it is reflected on the kind of financial sheets. We added a new line there and moved 1 million out of the funding hold up onto that line so we can track that project budget. And moving past kind of the big items, we've got here bullet number 3, ACMA's contingency that decreased this month by $73,000. And that was due to additional improvements being made at the Performing Arts Center building. And that was the one part of the school that we didn't tear down and we're not replacing because it was just renovated just a few years ago. And so that included adding some parking lot upgrades, and then making improvements to the entrance and the stairs to match current ADA requirements, and then some blinds installation. And then we also are updating the fencing around that building to match the fencing of the brand new school building. And then
I have a question on that. Were the lights and the entrance and exit not anticipated when the design was done?
Aaron, do you have any?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and this is having to do with the existing parking lot on the back of the building. So scope didn't really involve doing much with that, but this is just going in and upgrading those lights to kind of be consistent with the overall site now.
So Dick, if you recall our walkthrough, when we entered the building, the existing building on the far left side, so we're talking about that Performing Arts Center building that was pre-existing, and that's having the ability to have additional funds and address some of these issues was helpful.
Okay.
All right. And then the last budget comment here is that the ISB HVAC and roof budget, we had to increase that by $240,000 to match our bid results from this month. And we received 4 bids for that project. And then moving on to schedule perspective, a really exciting thing is that ACMA is substantially complete and they have been granted temporary occupancy, or their temporary occupancy certificate. So punch list and final cleanings are still ongoing. And all the major furniture orders have been placed, but we will still be doing, I don't think we've received very much of that yet. And so over the spring, delivery and installation of that furniture is going to be taking place. So the building is right at the finish line, and now we just have to outfit it and get it ready for students. So pretty exciting that that's
When would a good time be for the BAC to be able to have a tour of that building? I'm certainly interested.
Geez, I would look to Josh, I guess, but I'm open for whenever. I went by there yesterday and it looks beautiful right now.
Are we talking ACMA, Aaron?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we schedule our final meeting of the year there?
I was just thinking that our final meeting is in late June, and happy to have schedule our BAC meeting there, and we can set up a room, have a tour incorporated in part of the agenda.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'd be all for that.
Sounds great.
Always happy for on-site visits, so we will do that, especially now.
Yeah, great idea.
Second schedule perspective bullet here, the security upgrades classroom walls project. We've changed the schedule a little bit for that to a phased approach. So phase 1 is going to take place this summer, and that includes Montclair, West TV, Oak Hills, and Bethany. And that'll be completed over this summer. And then next summer, we will complete phase 2, which will be El Monica, Arrow Hassel, and Greenway. And then we're looking at a possible phase 3, dependent on budget and how everything comes in with the first 2 phases. And that phase 3 would be Jacob Wismer, Finley, Shoals Heights, and Nancy Riles. And that would also be completed over next summer.
I guess I don't know what classroom walls scope is. Can somebody remind me of that?
Yeah, for sure. So at all the schools listed, especially the ones listed in phase 1 and 2, there was situations similar to how Five Oaks used to be, but where a lot of the classrooms didn't have actual walls and doors. They were sort of adjacent to like a commons area, and they were just open. And the reason this project is taking place is really for security. It's in order to allow these areas to be locked down. It also has good benefits in terms of teaching because the sound was always a really big problem in these spaces.
Aaron, I can speak to it a little bit as well. Back in the late 60s and certainly through the 70s, we had a number of buildings that were built, Dick, without walls, as Aaron noted. And the reality is that I would say probably within a month to 2 months of those buildings opening, teachers built their own walls with file cabinets, with partitions, and a number of other things. And the reality is that it's just become a major safety factor for us in that we cannot secure a class of students behind a locked door in the event of an emergency in the school. So it's not uncommon. I can think of several buildings in my head, Rock Creek, Greenway, where there's multiple classrooms that are just out in an open area, and they're pretty close and adjacent to main hallways. So it's really trying to improve the safety and security, but most importantly, I would say on a daily basis, just good sound instructional space.
Good, thank you.
And Carl, just I'm sure many of these schools are up in zone 2, so I've spent a lot of time in them. You can probably just help clarify too. Our education specs for new buildings don't have this anymore. You know I was shocked when I went into Jacob Wismer and Finley to see that, even schools that weren't built in the late 60s or 70s still had this open classroom kind of construct where you could easily see and hear 100 kids at any given time in the room, rather than having 4 separate classrooms with about 25 kids each.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, and we no longer have that in our ed specs. Thus, the delivery of the 4 elementary schools that do not have any of those common spaces that are open in that manner. So every teaching space has got walls, but also a door that has a capacity of locking.
So I have a question here. Will the addition of these walls change the seismic ratings or gradings in any way?
It won't, no. I mean, for the most part, these are just partition walls that are being installed. They're braced and everything, but they're not really impacting, they're not improving the seismic performance, but it wouldn't hurt it either.
Okay, thanks.
And then our final schedule bullet here, the 2021 roof replacements. That's one of our district-wide facility repair projects. It's 5 different roof replacements taking place this summer. We've already completed the roofing scope at Errol Hassel, which is one of those schools, which is really exciting from a schedule perspective to already have that out of the way. And some additional flashing work will be completed there over the summer, but it's always good to have some early work done. We don't expect any other early work for that project to take place, but all the other schools are on track to be completed over the summer. And then we did add the SRGP comment here is the same from last month. Nothing major has shifted there yet, but we added under challenges and opportunities, material escalation. So we've seen kind of outside of our realm and a little bit inside our realm that lumber prices have been rising. And that's primarily due to the impact of COVID, but also the wildfires that took place last year. So we are kind of watching pricing coming in on lumber for our projects as we continue to go out to bid, and we'll be evaluating the impact that's having on the pricing and bids that we're getting. And we will consider a material change next year if we need to. So, and that's it for anything new this month.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. You have just touched on a topic that we're hearing a lot about, rising lumber prices and other construction materials. I'm curious, John, what are you hearing from contractors that you're working with in terms of their expectations over the next, say, 3, 6, 12 months and where costs are going?
I'll address that. We haven't heard a lot yet in terms of claims, like having it passed on to us. a lot of the projects we're talking about were bid kind of in the midst of this. And so, we're gonna go with, hey, you guys should have considered this when you bid the project because it was well known at that time. But certainly some of our contracts that have been in place for a little bit longer, I expect that they may come with hat in hand, and we'll need to look at, how material escalation is addressed in our contracts, because some of this escalation is a little bit unprecedented. Fortunately, I don't think we have too many projects that have a really heavy lumber component, and for us, that seems to be the biggest price we've seen recently.
Thank you.
I guess just a question on that, with generally speaking, the preponderance of work being design, bid, build, does it cause us to think about other procurement methods, other delivery methods to kind of help limit that exposure, especially as we're drawing down our reserves and everything, to maybe consider CMGC or design build?
Yeah, great question. Absolutely. Definitely try and match it with, the needs of the project. And we are doing design build. We have 2 big design build projects underway right now. One CMGC out there. But yeah, absolutely. In terms of escalation, I'm not sure that those are beneficial in some cases, because you end up with an expectation that we're going to negotiate it and end up paying for it out of contingency. Whereas it's a little bit easier to play hardball with design, bid, build, procurement. But really, it depends on the project and kind of the makeup of things.
Hey Aaron, this is Prashant here. In terms of price escalation or lead time, are you experiencing anything related to steel or any lead time for any of the items?
We haven't heard anything specific to just raw steel. What we have heard a lot about though is, and honestly, this isn't a whole lot different than most years, but big pieces of equipment with a complicated manufacturing line, like HVAC equipment or electrical switchgear.
Right.
Things are definitely being affected. And so definitely trying to be thoughtful about how we can limit the exposure on that by ordering it as early as possible, or making sure we're selecting equipment that is local.
Just what I'm experiencing, just wanted to share, I'm experiencing about 40% hike in steel pricing, especially structural steel. And the lead times are 6 to even 11 months at the moment. And as you mentioned, same thing for electrical, switch gears, even for stormwater structures sometimes, but the lead times are increasing. So just wanted to share what I'm experiencing right now.
Prashant, I got a question for you just on your experience. Have you, in terms of production, have they been able to tell you any other avenues or kind of what they're looking at in terms of availability?
I think more so than availability, it's just different options. So for example, if you're using like a standard joist, can we go with shop built trusses type thing? Like those are the type of options that I'm seeing right now versus the actual steel, if it's related to steel. The lead times are just crazy at the moment, and the pricing is astronomical, and contractors literally are not even holding their pricing, sometimes even true for a day. I mean, it's just hard to get even somebody to say, hey, this is good for 30 days, 60 days, etc. But
I can echo that on my side, and specifically on roofing. When it comes to standing seam metal roofing, we're seeing those lead times extend out to 4 months and beyond when it comes to ordering those materials for our roofing projects. And definitely on the assemblies that you mentioned, HVAC equipment. We haven't seen too much on electrical, but we are seeing price deltas on all those components. And then wood on that end, we have seen a 100% increase on lumber prices. I mean, it's 100% and rising currently.
Right. And the way we are managing, Joshua, is we are also like paying, for example, let's say here is $50,000 to lock in the steel pricing in queues by doing the shop drawings. So kind of trying to find different ways to get ourselves in the queue, I would say.
Right, right.
So anything that we can do to purchase the item or lock in before, I would highly suggest that at this point.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Thanks. I think we're kind of lucky here to some degree in that most of our projects that are remaining are relatively small. So we don't have huge orders of joists. There's not really significant material orders on most of these projects. I mean, mostly they're smaller and more labor intensive type things that we have going on. Roofing, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that about standing seam. Most of our roofs are low slope like TPO roofs. So that hasn't, we haven't seen that, fortunately. That sounds painful.
I mean, just keeping eyes and ears open and kind of talking to general contractors in the early stages. If we have a need, just thinking about this, I would say even like 3-4 months before we actually have a need would be a good idea. That way we don't get into that price increase war.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay. Map here, which is a little bit hard to read at this scale.
Aaron, I'm going to make a recommendation because of the timing and Brian's having to depart at 7:15. Let's go to LRFP so we can get going with that. And if I would ask from the BAC, if you have anything more from the report, please reach out to us by email or phone call, and we'll be happy to take those questions.
Okay, Mr. Sparks.
All right, thanks. Aaron, there you go. Thank you, everybody. I have 26 slides here, and I promise to take as much time as possible and read every single slide to you because I know that's what everybody likes in PowerPoint presentations. So some of you have seen this presentation or variations of this presentation before, and all kidding aside, I will try and click through this fairly quickly so that we'll have time to talk about it. One of the questions that we've come up with is, particularly since we have been in this unprecedented pandemic situation, is why are we doing the long range planning now? And the short answer is, while our education system may be interrupted, the aging of our facilities, the needs of our facilities doesn't stop. And so we have, as you can see here, a number of bullet items why we're doing this work now, and not the least of which is the state requiring having a 10-year plan, but all these subsequent actions that are dependent on having a current long-range facilities plan. Next slide, please. We have three major sections that we looked at in preparing the plan, and the first one is about educational programming. And what we've learned in this is that we have a number of schools that are below our square footage targets for classroom size, square footage per student in the district. We also have needs and facility improvement with preschool, special ed, and physical education. PE in particular is one of those issues that have been driven by state legislation where we need to have children active so many minutes a day. So we need to create these teaching spaces for our PE instructors to have time with our students. And also we've learned that if we look through our equity lens, we have 12 schools that are very high scoring when it comes to the issues that you see here in terms of our socioeconomic demographics of the district. Next slide, please. Our second category is when we talk about our facility condition, and we look at that through a number of lenses. On this one, you can see facility age, where we're looking to strive for a 75-year lifespan with our facilities. We have in the dark columns, you can see that we have 5 buildings that already exceed the 75 years. And Beaverton High School was built in 1915. So that's, well over 100 years. And you can see Raleigh Hills here also at 93 years. Next slide, please. As part of our facility condition, you've heard about our facility condition assessment in the FCI, so I don't need to go into that in much detail here. But you can see we have a lot of facilities in those dark columns that exceed our that go into that critical category for where it makes more sense to consider replacing the facility rather than continuing to invest in maintaining those assets. And you look at Raleigh Hills K-8 as our worst performing school, and Beaverton High School as well is up there fairly high. And if I can draw your attention all the way to the right, and you'll see transportation, in parens south. That is our transportation facility, or I'm sorry, the Allen is the one that I want to call your attention to. That's the one that's on Allen Boulevard. Next slide, please. And then our another key factor that you've talked about before is our seismic condition. And you can see in the dark columns, these are buildings that are below our, they're well below our desired goal for maintaining, that occupancy type of condition. And this is in direct relationship to age of these facilities as well, because the seismic codes that we live under now certainly did not exist when these buildings were constructed. And a lot of these buildings have that unreinforced masonry in them, which is part of the reason why they have those poor scores. Next slide, please. So you've seen this slide here as well. This is our deferred maintenance inventory for 10 years. This is a huge number, and we've talked about it quite a bit when we looked at the facility conditions assessment. So while we're identifying $610 million in need, depending on what we do with buildings, like if we were replaced Raleigh Hills, the line that you would, kind of lower mid part of the page, all that investment would go away. And the same thing for Beaverton High School. Like in year one, supposedly it's $31 million. Well, if we replaced the school, obviously we wouldn't need to spend $31 million on maintenance at Beaverton High School. Next slide, please. So our key takeaways in this is we've got 2 buildings that really fall in our worst categories, and that's Raleigh Hills K-8 and Beaverton High School. And you've heard us talk about this for some time. We also have 10 facilities that fall in our worst seismic category. And as I just mentioned, we have a deferred maintenance estimate of $610 million. Next slide, please. This here is our third category, which is about our enrollment and capacity. And this is another complicated issue where, as a district, we have capacity to accommodate enrollment. What we don't have necessarily is capacity where that enrollment is growing. So you can see in the areas in red, those areas are where we're going to continue to see growth. And in the high school map, that is primarily the North Bethany area. And obviously you see that in the middle school as well as in the elementary school. Now, some of these issues are addressed through capacity additions. Others are can be addressed through boundary adjustments or other things that don't require necessarily investment of capital dollars. So I look at Bonnie Slope, for example, in the elementary version, and we can do a boundary adjustment there, which would move kids to Terra Linda, which is immediately to the southwest of Bonnie Slope. So you can see 100, in 10 years, we can see an over enrollment of approximately 126 students, whereas Terra Linda would be negative 185. So that capacity exists where we could move students and no longer have that kind of utilization concern at Bonnie Slope. I'm sorry, next slide, please. So our key takeaways here, as you can see, is we do have some capacity concerns, and our biggest one, of course, is going to be at Westview High School. Next slide, please. So we met with our focus group. We had approximately 12 or so individuals from across the district who helped us kind of vet as we were going through our planning process. And you can see here in terms of their input, in terms of prioritization and our utilization. So for example, under utilization, we're talking about boundary adjustments and perhaps school consolidation. So for example, if we built a new Raleigh Hills at the current EdSpec capacity of 750 students, would we have the ability to consolidate other schools into Raleigh Hills? So for example, would McKay be able to go to Raleigh Hills, or is it Montclair or another nearby school? Our focus group also was talking about prioritizing that special needs programming, the seismic upgrades, as well as that maintaining our maintenance backlog, continuing to invest in that. Next slide, please. So equity is obviously a major issue and concern and priority for the district. Our focus group reflected that. And our focus group is also pushing us to, keep focused on this last bullet item. What are must-haves? What do we gotta have? And what are those nice-to-have items? Next slide, please. We also had a series of 3 open houses, and they were much lengthier meetings. And you can see that many of the things that our focus group addressed and advised us on also came out of our open houses. The overcapacity at Stoller Middle School is an issue because when we were doing the boundary adjustment, we looked at our current student capacity model, and in the new long-range facilities plan, we're proposing a different, much more accurate student capacity formula. Next slide, please. So at the end of the open houses and at the end of the videos that we shared with the community that got over 1,000 views and responses, we asked these questions in terms of how you would, would you support and how would you prioritize projects? So the first one is, obviously there's a lot of support to move forward with a plan and a subsequent capital measure. In option 2, which I'll get to in just a moment, you'll see has a lot of support as well. And then you can see the prioritization of the project. Our Allen Transportation Center is not getting any love from the community, and that's just frankly because they don't understand it. But the transportation center down there is a critical, essential facility for the district. And the facility down there, it's just not safe and it's not working very well. So our transportation staff aren't able to do as much work as they might be able to with new and safe equipment, particularly the hydraulic lifts. So in terms of the option 1 and option 2, I'll go into that here right now. So next slide. I believe you've seen this before, where we talked about option 1, which is the no increase in taxes. It's the renewal of the expiring bond. Option 2 is we ask for the renewal or refill the expiring bond, but also ask for a 25-cent per $1,000 of assessed property value tax increase to go along with it. And at the bottom, you can see the difference in the amount of revenue that would be realized between the two. So when our community groups in our focus group was supporting plan option 2, they're supporting in the 80% range. And granted, this is not a scientific survey, but for those people who participated, they believe that there is a compelling reason and a justifiable reason for going to the voters for a tax increase. And you can see in these slides how we would propose to allocate money between the options. So next slide, please. So in the educational programming part, you'll see that special education improvements are a part of both options, as are pre-kindergarten modifications. In the outdoor learning, that's under the $725 million, so plan option 2, which would create larger and improve existing outdoor covered play areas. And then under the physical education component, while there is in both plan options, there are options for new gyms and provide other improvements elsewhere. And I also want to note here that this does include the outdoor restroom and storage facility at Westview High School. So that is a component that that community has long been desiring. So in the second one about condition, facility condition, we have in here in both options that we are going to replace Raleigh Hills. So in this slide, you can see, as you saw earlier, how poorly Raleigh Hills scored in comparing it to all our other facilities. So in plan option 1 and plan option 2, we note that Raleigh Hills would be replaced. And I also want to remind this committee that the money that was going to be invested in this bond to Raleigh Hills is being carried over to a subsequent bond. So that would be part of this bond if a bond would be approved. The next priority is Beaverton High School. And you can see how it scores compared to the other schools as well. And as we talked about a little while ago, that first year of 31 million, well, in 10 years, that saves $53 million in deferred maintenance need. And then lastly, the building that doesn't get any love is the Allen Street Transportation Facility, and we are including that as well. Again, because of its needed support for the operation of the district. Next slide, please. So in modernization, you can see the total numbers that we have right here. It's obviously not as big a number as the replacement, but in here, and I won't read any of this to you, but you can see the types of investments that we want to make under the modernization. A lot of it is being driven by needs such as our nutrition services upgrades, where we've got facilities, assets in there that need to be replaced, as well as the ongoing seismic work. So lots and lots of projects that are in this category. Next slide, please. And under enrollment, there's something very important that we've talked about already in terms of how do we, address a lot of our need without spending capital investment on this. And these are some of the issues, under boundary adjustment consolidation. But we're also looking at, obviously, we need to do more for the north part of the district. So at Sato Elementary and at Stoller, and also at Oak Hills. Oak Hills is not seeing a rapid growth, but it's also not seeing any kind of decline. And there are about 8 portables out there at that site at Oak Hills. And we would like to get those students into permanent buildings. And I think that was my last slide. Oh, no, so next steps here. So we've reviewed the draft facilities plan, which we have sent comments back to the consultant team. We'll be finalizing that here in the next couple of weeks, at which time we will then go to the May board hearing to do a presentation and have a conversation with the board members on the plan, followed by a recommendation and adoption of the plan in June. Whether or not we can get to a recommendation for capital measure in June, that might be overly optimistic. We will have at least 2 new board members after the May election. So we would need to certainly involve those new members before we get to any kind of capital measure. And my last comment here, and I believe all of you are cognizant of this, but the long range facilities plan and a capital bond measure are 2 different things. The long range facilities plan is the policy plan document for the district with a 10-year lifespan. The capital bond measure is a funding strategy to realize the plan. So a lot of times we commingle the terms, but they really are 2 separate documents and 2 separate, I don't know what to call it, but they're 2 distinct actions. So with that, I will end my presentation. I'm more than happy to answer questions, or I hope we can have a dialogue about any of the presentation or other things that you might have on your mind.
I have a question. Back when you said that 80-some% voted yes to proceed on either option 1 or option 2, what are the reasons why the 17 or 18% didn't think it was time to go forward?
So, for example, one of our focus group members was talking about, hey, we have capacity in the district in order to accommodate everybody. So why don't we do a large boundary adjustment, kind of high school, middle school, and elementary school to balance all the way across our capacities at our schools. From a one-dimensional view, that is certainly possible, but as many of you have experienced as well as I have, boundary adjustments are a very trying process and are one of those things that you need to use deliberately and perhaps sparingly. And so that was one example why a person didn't support going forward with a large measure.
Okay.
So
it was a single person that represent?
It was a single person in that particular case, but there were others as well who had other issues. Meaning one person didn't particularly agree with the maintenance requirements. Another person was saying, yeah, we shouldn't rebuild Beaverton High School. Why not combine it with other high schools that might have capacity? So there's it's variations on a thing.
Thank you.
This is Brad. I just had a question. Just in thinking about that long-range facilities plan, did you find that the information that you have, are you able to convey the value of the kind of replacement and seismic upgrade strategy as opposed to just a pure deferred maintenance strategy? Meaning, are we able to kind of show the change in the facility condition index and also the safety ratings? Kind of, are we able to project that and share that with folks to help them understand the benefit of that?
Yeah, great question. Absolutely is the answer. What we didn't show here are the more than 40 community group meetings that we did, where these were people like NAC meetings or CPO meetings or PTO meetings, where people were like, "Oh, geez, really? You're gonna come and propose a tax increase? Man, get those kids in school first. That where's your priority? That kind of thing." So the initial feeling was not hostile, but very skeptical. And after we were able to run through a lot of these scenarios and explain, okay, here's why we're looking at Raleigh Hills in comparison to the other schools. So even if I don't have a child going to Raleigh Hills, I can see, wow, that really is an investment that needs to be made. So having that level of detail where you can show the condition, but then in return how it reduces overall balance and extend lifespan, people were like, okay, yeah, I can get behind this because now I understand.
I have a question here. So you mentioned that replacing Raleigh Hills will decrease the deferred maintenance from by about 53 million over 10 years. Is that right?
I think it was 12, Reno, if we go back. We look at that last
Aaron,
bullet.
can you go to that slide, Aaron?
Oh, the one for Beaverton, yeah.
For Raleigh Hills. Was it Raleigh Hills, Reno, or Beaverton?
Yeah, I was talking about Raleigh Hills, I think.
Yeah,
Deferred
Raleigh Hills.
maintenance.
Yeah, 12 million, that bottom bullet.
Oh, that's over 10 years, right?
I believe so, Aaron. Is that correct? Over 10?
Yeah, let me go back to the other one. We can look. Yes, that is correct. Yep, that looks like it's over 10 years.
And what is the similar number for the Beaverton High School?
I believe that was on the Beaverton High School slide also.
Yeah, it was 54 million or $53 million.
Oh, okay. So I had it mixed up. Okay, so Beaverton High School was 53 million. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
If I understand this correctly, the Raleigh Hills would go forward either under option 1 or option 2.
That's correct.
Option 1 does not require a bond to be voted on, correct?
No, it would be a no tax increase renewal. It still would have to be voted on.
It'd have to be approved by the voters, Dick.
Still has to be, okay.
300.
Given if I had a child going to Raleigh Hills, I would wonder, when is this going to get fixed? When are we going to build a new school? Have we done any forecasting to be able to give some kind of window on when we would start work on that?
That's a great question. And honestly, the answer is no. What we are doing right now, first we have to kind of figure out what the projects are, and then we have to go figure out sort of an execution plan and, how long will each project take? And that's what we're working on right now. For hills, I would expect we would do it pretty quickly. All of the replacements we would try and front load just to help with escalation, but certainly Raleigh Hills, we have moved forward with the design work and definitely plan to have a jump start on that project to be able to do it as quickly as possible.
So
I would recommend that we do some thinking on timing. I happened to have had dinner last night with a former teacher who was there during an earthquake with students. And her description of being in that building and watching things swaying back and forth and trying to walk, she was away from the kids and trying to get back to them. It sounded like a pretty harrowing experience. So if we're looking too far ahead, I wonder how much at risk we are putting these kids.
So let me offer this. One of the things that we're doing right now is, Aaron noted this just a moment ago, but we are moving forward with design work and planning for the Raleigh Hills site, independent of a bond being approved. So we are going to save a lot of time by doing that, that time-consuming work now. And if and when a bond is approved, we will be able to go, ideally, we will be able to go to a bidding situation fairly quickly. And Aaron, I don't want to say anything that's going to cause you to, collapse here, but we are really trying to be sensitive to the need of Raleigh Hills as well as Beaverton High School.
Well, I think factoring that in that's a key factor is the design, because that'll be on the critical path.
It will be, right.
I would go a little bit further, and I think it would help if I were on the board and I was considering the timing for this next bond measure and the different options that you have. That's one thing I would want to know is how much time are we talking about to get to breaking ground, or more importantly, when it can be occupied?
Right. And we've done some of that initial forecasting, Dick. But what I would like to do, just to be respectful of time here before we lose Brian, I'd like to get to program reserve discussion. So we can definitely come back to LRFP. Steve, if you have time to hang out, that'd be great. If we can get Aaron to the program reserve presentation, and then we'll be happy to come back to long range facility plan. But Steve, thank you for your time and giving us that presentation.
I mean, this is the most important subject ever.
I know it is. I know it is.
Josh and Aaron, I'm wondering, based on Dick's question, I think it's a good question, is we look at some of those larger projects that we're looking and forecasting for in the next bond. Can we do some of that mapping out for our June meeting? More of tentative mapping, just to kind of, nobody's making promises, but I absolutely agree with Dick that not only our community, but our board members will ultimately want to be able to say, kind of just have a sense of where things are at. There's got to be give room in there, I know, but.
Yeah, absolutely. We can. I have it. It's just,
I was going to say, Aaron has that.
we just need to review it internally first. But yeah, absolutely. We can for sure do that.
Noted for next meeting, Carl. We'll have that as an agenda item.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Great question, Dick. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go through this real quick. We teed this up last month, but what we want to talk about is the program reserve usage. This is timely and needs to be done rather quickly because we're getting close to the end of the bond. Our staffing allocation for the current bond runs through next summer or to the end of next calendar year. And in order to be able to execute projects next summer, the additional added projects, we really need to be able to get going on them right away. So you saw earlier, we're showing about 7.5 million in program contingency, program reserve. I am saying right now that I expect this to go up once we close out ACMA. Should be about 8.2 million once that is factored in. And so that's kind of the amount I want us to consider as we're looking at additional projects. We've done a lot of outreach to generate a list of additional projects. In the end here, it really didn't vary a whole lot from the project list that we had last year that we reviewed at this group. We needed to consider all these different criteria when looking at added projects. You know, we looked at evaluating it through the scoring criteria developed with the Bond Accountability Committee, ability to rapidly execute projects, and our ability, you know, having staffing to be able to do these additional projects. And then a lot of the projects on the list, I'll show you, we were able to include in the next bond. So that kind of narrowed the list down a little bit. But the three projects we'd like to talk about tonight and hopefully get an endorsement of would be adding some classrooms at BOS, which we've talked about already, a partial repipe at El Monica Elementary School, and then looking at adding additional fencing, mostly at elementary schools, but throughout the district. So this is what the breakdown looks like. It's pretty simplified here, but kind of starting with 8.2 million and then working our way down the list. The first project I wanted to note was, it's one that's underway already, but it's the camera and classroom wall addition. Those were approved as added projects last year. I'm recommending that we continue to hold about 2 million of the program reserve in order to make sure we're able to execute both of those projects fully. We don't have complete cost data on either of those projects yet. They're both, actually I have a slide on it here. The camera project is under contract through a design build solicitation. We've been working with the team to put together the design, and we don't have costs back yet. We should have them early next month. Similar, the classroom walls and doors is out to bid right now, and so we should have bids next month and kind of have a better feel for where we're at with respect to those initial budgets. But it would be prudent to hold on to some reserve for those. Both of these are kind of projects where you could almost keep spending and spending, and you know, at a certain point you have to draw the line. But there's a lot of need in both these areas. VOS Classroom Edition, we talked about this one last year. So we have been doing the design. We hired the architect. They have completed the design, and actually we have biddable documents at this point. We have stopped what we're doing though in order to bring the project back through this group and through the school board for approval. Right now we're estimating that the total project cost to be about 4 million. That's gone up a bit from last time we looked at it. A number of factors, you know, certainly escalation in COVID is probably the driving one, but a few other items I noted on here. We added bathrooms. Also, this number includes contingency, which wasn't in the initial estimate from last year. But we would like to be able to execute this project next summer, and that means moving ahead with it pretty quickly if approved.
Hey, Aaron, can you remind me the need for that? Is that based on a unanticipated increase in number of students that will be attending VOS?
Aaron, I can address that. Dick, we've had a number of good things happen to our district most recently. And that is that, as you well know, in recent years, we've not only maintained our local levy, which has sustained a number of teachers in our district, approximately 300, which all of that was part of the planning when VOS was built and we were doing the planning there. We have also received additional funding from the state that has allowed us to increase the number of teachers that we have in our class or in our schools. So that's actually decreased our class sizes, which was not part of the overall formula. So while we had targeted 27 to 28 teachers at VOS, we're now edging to 32 to 33 teachers at that same facility with no boundary change and approximately the same number of students in that facility.
Okay. Thanks, Carl.
Yes.
So here is the project selection criteria that we looked at last year when we went and added projects. I need to hurry up here, I can see, but this is how it scored. We added the fencing project in here. When we went through and did outreach with the principals and community, this was a huge one. It was a huge desire by most of the principals. Really to keep unwanted people off of campus during school hours. And it's also, in many cases, to keep kids from walking off of campus during school hours. And then also the partial repipe at El Monica. I actually have slides on both of those coming up. But all the other projects I crossed out, you can see I noted where we would be able to address those projects. And got them all covered either through the BCA or seismic projects in the current bond, or most often it added into the project list for the next bond. And this was just that evaluation criteria and what it looked like. So site fencing, I kind of described this already. This is an appealing project as an added project because it can be done in really, really small chunks. There's not really a budget risk here. You know, really we just go out and work on the upgrades until, you know, with whatever budget is available. And it takes time to do. So it'd be kind of a gradual incremental improvement. And then the El Monica repipe, we would propose doing that next summer also. Last year, we actually approved very similar projects at McKinley and Chehalem elementary schools. They were both partial repipes and would love to be able to sort of sit in with those two. It'd be pretty efficient to be able to execute all three of those together. So that was quick. Happy to take any questions. I listed kind of what our next steps are. We'd like to be able to talk about it here tonight and have you all consider an endorsement of these recommended projects. And then we will take those to the school board in May and then in June also.
Sorry, Aaron, I muted you accidentally. I meant to unmute.
Like, oh, geez, did I say something?
Outstanding job. If you could go back to the summary slide so that the committee can take a look at what we were asking for an endorsement on. So just so that slide's up on the screen.
Is it this one here?
That one right there. Perfect. So opening it up to any questions from the committee.
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say, I think I really like this list of projects. It's really consistent with the values and the priorities we've talked about throughout the bond. And it's a good time to move on them. You know, we're substantially complete with our last big project. And, you know, it's a great time to get the rest of those dollars out into the community. Does anyone else have questions?
See that Cheryl's got a question. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree with Brian's comments just a minute ago. I think this is a really balanced approach to achieving a number of different opportunities and addressing problems. My real question, though, is can you talk a little bit about current staffing in your work team? And do you have the capacity to do this work? And if November is good for you guys and the voters approve the bond, how does this work tied into the, the new batch of dollars coming your direction? So we see you guys, and I know you have a bigger team, and I know you've had some transition and some turnover. So I'm just curious how you're doing from a staffing resource standpoint.
Yeah, really, really good question, Cheryl. Geez, it's one that keeps me up at night, to be honest. It actually, that your question ties in with what Josh is going to present about here in a minute. But as far as these 3 projects that I'm listed here, I do have capacity to address these 3 projects. I had sort of seen them coming, and so we've made sure we had project managers able to execute these projects. The next bond, when that comes, if it comes through next year, that we're going to be busy. There's going to be a lot of overlap, which is really part of why I am trying to hurry up and get these going and not have them kind of languish for several more years. We do really want to have a clean break as much as possible, but it's going to be tight. Josh will address it here on this, but we probably are going to need to look at adding staffing here before too long.
Yeah, I'm gonna cover federal support dollars and not bond dollars. And of course, I'm super excited to get more money. And Aaron's like, I need more people. So I'll cover that quickly when I get to my portion of the brief. But like Aaron says, we got enough capacity, Cheryl, to do what we need to do now. It's good to have a plan for the rest of the PR so that we can get through and have those worked out and execute those projects.
And I just had a quick question about the VOS. VOS is a new facility, correct? And with the classroom additions, are these actually, were these all kind of projected out in the design for that facility, or are these surge facilities like modulars?
No, and that's part of the reason for the cost, that these would be incorporated in the main facility. It was projected to some degree, so it will look very consistent with the rest of the building in terms of aesthetics and flow. There's a good spot to put it.
And a major objective in this has been expressed by, I know at least one board member, of making sure that we have the safety and security of our students in mind with any kind of additional space for classrooms, and they need to be ultimately part of the main facility with interior access. So students aren't having to access their classrooms via portable or modular where they have to leave the building, that kind of thing. So that is the objective, and as long as I have a breath in me, that's where we're moving forward.
Any other questions? Doesn't seem like there are.
I would
go ahead, Dick.
We vote on this.
I will take that as a motion to support the staff recommendation. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Great, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? And so it passes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, hurrah or hooray or something.
Something. They had a horn or some streamers or something. Pop.
We'd scare everybody to death if that.
There you go. John's got it. John's got the right.
That's what we needed.
That's what we needed.
Nice job. I like it, Cheryl.
Yeah. I do have to say, early in the bond program, I really worried about how hard it would be to allocate these program reserves. And I think the staff deserves a lot of credit for coming up with a process that's made it pretty easy and made the decisions really clear and transparent. So thank you for your work in that.
No, and thank you to the committee for the input. I know when I first came on board, it was a conversation of how do we help improve the process for scoring these projects. And Brian, you made that recommendation, and that really focused our attention in the right direction. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you. I apologize for having to leave. I just want, before I step out, I had hoped to get a draft of the board report out to the committee today. I ran out of time, but I will get that out tomorrow for the upcoming board meeting for a report on Q4 of 2020 and Q1 of 21.
Great, thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to do is go back.
Sorry.
Go back to the long-range facility plan and open it up if there are any other questions. Sorry, we had to rush through for that. So we still have Steve online for any other questions from the committee. Steve, anything else that you'd like to add before I move on to the next topic?
No, I appreciate everybody's attention and thought to this. All I would like to do is just, the risk of being redundant is saying that we are definitely working with we'll be working with the permitting agencies on Raleigh Hills, because that is a logistical Gordian knot of issues out there all surrounding Shoals Ferry Road. So, we want to get on that as soon as we can.
Great. Okay, so we will move on to the next topic. I will cover this presentation, and we talked about it at the last meeting. Looking at COVID-19, what are the impacts and how does that, if you look at our current bond, are we looking at any projects to support COVID-19 and its impact to our schools and our students? But it kind of bottom line up front is that we are very fortunate. We have federal funding coming down through the Oregon Department of Education, and we are able to look at this funding to help get some priority facility projects, specifically for HVAC. So I'll cover some of that. But through the Coronavirus Response and Relief Appropriations Act, it's a big act that provided billions of dollars to education across the nation. And with that came hundreds of millions of dollars to the state of Oregon. So we refer to it as ESSER, and that's the acronym that you see up on the screen. So it's the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. That again is provided through ODE, it's federal funding. So separate from the bond, separate from our general fund that we get. The district received, we're getting the money in phases. So we received ESSER 1 is what we're referring it to. We received 10.1 million already in ESSER 1 funding from the government, federal government. We've already expended that as a district, and you can apply those dollars to staff and a multitude of things. And so that money has already been expensed and accounted for. It expires in September of 2022, but we've already gone through those funds. For ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, so the next phases of this funding, we're estimating that the district, our Beaverton School District, will receive about $67 million. And that's temporary funding. It'll expire in September of 2024. And so I listed on the presentation what the money can be used for. Again, we can use it for staffing, addressing low-income students. We can purchase IT, so purchase student devices, iPads, Chromebooks, providing mental health services. And then the last bullet is where we're going to target, that I'm going to talk about, is providing projects to improve indoor air quality to reduce the risk of virus transmission, which is something that will then tie into our HVAC area. But there are many other things that I haven't covered on what this funding can be used for. So it's very flexible, and we're very appreciative that we have these dollars. So of the 67 million that we are expecting for phase 2, ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, as a district, we're looking, and specifically for facilities or maintenance team, we're looking at 15 million of that 67 million will be applied to facility repairs and improvements. So that's kind of a big picture, kind of looking at kind of how can we use the money, what money we received to date, and what we're anticipating, and very hopeful that we'll get quite a bit of money for this.
If I can add a comment here is, we're targeting 15 million. Josh could have easily and probably even by tomorrow have $50 million identified in terms of projects needed across this district with no trouble at all. We're hopeful that this amount comes forward, realizing that all these funds, while it sounds like a large sum of money over a 3-year period, there's a multitude of areas in which it would potentially can apply and should apply. And so no final decisions have been made, and we're in process of that, and we're hoping to have that over the coming weeks. I would love to be able to have some final decisions for this committee by the end of June, which I'm hopeful for. So our board certainly has not yet had full disclosure of all the various funds of where they're going, because not all those decisions have been made yet. So in process.
Absolutely, definitely in the planning stages. And if you go to the next slide, Aaron, what I'm going to talk about is how our facility condition assessment that we have talked about, that we talked about in our long range facility plan, how does that impact our priorities in this federal funding? So looking at that approximate 15 million, we've prioritized our priorities in kind of 4 groups there you can see. So we're looking at COVID-19, PPE and supplies. When I say PPE, face coverings and plexiglass. Supplies would be like Clorox wipes and things that we can apply to help fight COVID. New projects, so anything new that we haven't, it's not a repair project. We've got repair projects and we have staffing needs. So those kind of the 4 categories that we've prioritized and grouped our priorities towards. You're probably wondering why PPE and supplies? Why would facilities be looking at that? So for our district, since the start of the pandemic, we stood up an emergency operations center. Our facilities and maintenance team has been kind of that lead for the district when it comes to coordinating PPE and supplies. So all those requirements, needs come through us. And so we're still working that for the district. We're leading that for the district. So that's an important piece that we said we got to set aside some funding for. For new projects, we are looking at, so you've got some examples up there, Barnes Elementary School and West TV Elementary School. Of all our schools right now, we have 2 gyms that don't have any mechanical ventilation. So when it comes to an impact of using space, that is right up front. Based on what ASHRAE tells us, how we should bring in more outside air, how we should increase our run times. No mechanical ventilation, it becomes an impact. So the alternative right now would be you got to open the doors, you got to bring in fans and just run a lot of air through. We want to get to a point where we can have some mechanical ventilation in those facilities. So that for a new project would be top of the list. West TV Elementary School, the main building itself, if you haven't been to that school, obviously one of our older schools, they have old unit ventilation systems in the classrooms. And fortunately, those unit ventilation systems can bring in outside air, they're sufficient, but we are also supplementing those classrooms with air cleaners, because we feel like that's a step we need to take to help ensure that we're getting safe quality air inside those classrooms. So we would look to upgrade that system in that building as part of as a new project. Capital Center, we have our Capital Center is located off of 185th. We have several programs in there. We have our base option school in Capital Center. We also have other departments from the central office that reside in Cap Center. That HVAC would be an upgrade. We just didn't finish upgrade improvements in that building, so we're looking to do that as part of this under new projects. Under repair projects, we have the facility condition assessment. So we have all this work spreadsheet, we've prioritized it, and we can focus that on specifically HVAC based on the age of equipment, the condition of the equipment, and it's very helpful that we have that list. That estimate alone for FCA work is about 13 million, and that's the work that we got from McKinstry, just that bullet alone. And we have a spreadsheet with all the summary of those items. Chiller replacement at Nancy Riles, we know it's an old chiller. Wasn't captured in the FCA for priorities, but our foreman, HVAC foreman is saying, I would like to do that chiller replacement now because of how we're running our equipment. And it should be a priority for us. And then looking at staffing. So going to Aaron's comment, Cheryl, going back to your comment and question. So I'll just jump to it, right? So the last sub bullet of under staffing, project management support for ESSER. We know that Aaron's team is going to need additional project managers and coordinators to help do this. So we're looking at that too. You know, we've got projects identified, but we need the staffing support for that. And not only for Aaron's team, but the top bullets above that, HVAC controls contract support, that talks to our maintenance team. You know, we are we have a great maintenance team, but they're not sourced properly. We don't have the right resources. We need additional resources. And the fact that we are running our systems longer, we're able to do remote operation, remote controls, but having the staff to be able to monitor that is what that HVAC controls contract support is talking to. Boiler preventive maintenance. You know, you tie ventilation, you tie the heating and cooling to those systems. We are not doing preventive maintenance as a district. So we would like to be able to use the ESSER funding to help support that. And then improving our teams by adding mechanical technicians. You know, we had a team many years ago, about 7 technicians. We're down to 5. We'd like to be able to plus it back up and get to the right level of support. And we also have pending retirements. So we know that we're going to lose staff here in the near future. So having additional technicians on board, be able to train them, gain that corporate knowledge would be ideal. And then the last slide, Aaron, if you could move forward. So what we have done to date in preparation for receiving the ESSER funding, we submitted our budget request to the business office. We have laid out a plan. That last slide that's about $26 million in need. We could definitely go up much higher than that. We think we're going to get about 15. So as we get our actual funds, the actual amounts that we're going to get, we're going to have to sit down and prioritize based on everything that I just covered when it comes to new projects, repair projects, and staffing. We did award a design project using our general fund dollars that we have currently now for our ventilation projects at West TV and Barnes. So we wanted to start that. So we have a design ready to go. It can be ready and we can execute once we get the funding. So we wanted to move forward with that. And under next steps, like I just talked about, we want to finalize our priority list based on what available funding that we get. And we also can look at, you know, potentially the bond program reserve. So Aaron just covered VOS classroom addition. He covered El Monica repipe and fencing. There's a $2 million placeholder for classroom walls and cameras. And let's just say, you know, if this ESSER money were not to come through, which we think it will, but what if it didn't come through, we may have to look at some of that program reserve to help with like ventilation at Barnes and West TV, which is an impact to our schools right now because we can't use those gyms. So some things that we need to think about, this is all planning, like Carl said earlier, we're still in the planning stages. So a very quick brief about that, but at least it gives you a sense of how we're looking at this funding coming in and the priorities that we're placing for that. Any questions from the committee?
Yes, I have a couple of questions, especially since some of this ESSER funding could go towards IT. So the question is, currently, does every student in the Beaverton school district have access to a school district provided Chromebook or tablet?
That is a great question. Radio. So we are going to, in June, we are going to have our chief information technology officer, Stephen Langford, give a presentation. He's going to talk about how we received funding from the federal funding, how we've used the bond to help get to pay for devices. And he'll talk to you kind of what the plan is for one-for-one devices when it comes to iPads, when it comes to Chromebooks.
And a related question is also, does every student have access to the internet? Is there some way to ensure that? Because these two go together, right?
Exactly, and he will cover that. So we're going to talk to that actually this evening, but I think opportune time would be in June.
The reason I ask is because I'm involved with some other committees in the city, and there are nonprofits which are trying to actually get funding in order to provide Beaverton School District students with Chromebooks and internet services. So I just want to make sure that I mean, we are not double funding it, or it's being taken care of elsewhere and not by a nonprofit.
Right. And I can tell you that Steve Langford, our chief information technology officer, he's got a plan for how we're going to get to one-for-one replacement on iPads and Chromebooks, and he can talk to the different funding sources, and additionally what other nonprofit support we're receiving, because we are getting that support when it comes to internet access.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Brad, did
This
you have
is
a
Brad.
question?
I was just going to say, I appreciate the work that you guys have done. It's a heavy lift. I'm well aware of everything that you do, to the fact of setting out PPE for everybody when they're coming in the buildings, setting up signage, all that. It's a huge lift. So I'm glad to see that you guys are able to possibly recoup some costs and make the case for that. The one question I had was really regarding the sustained throughput that you have as a program for O&M, and then also for project delivery. And just in thinking about that, like as we're talking about these dollars, if they're to come through, just that we're able as a district to be able to maintain kind of visibility on what we can actually handle,
Right.
and then being able to justify that staff count. Because I see that you're counting out some staff counts for maintenance techs, but within the context of the whole program, does that give you more capacity then to do more HVAC work through the program? And same goes for the PMs doing the capital work.
Absolutely. Ties into several things that we're looking at. So we're looking at with the increased in staffing, we also have that FCA data. We used McKinstry to help put that together. We're also hiring McKinstry to do gap analysis. So we have all this data that tells us how we should prioritize our work. They're going to come in, they're going to be able to take a look at our current resources, and then look at how we should put together preventive maintenance, corrective maintenance, and then give us that gap based on what we think. We have an idea of what that looks like, but getting their expertise, K-12 expertise, to be able to give us that data would be very helpful. And then it also talks to the type of O&M funding that we're going to get to be able to support that. We have made requests to the business office when it comes to sustainment of O&M. So for example, with the COVID lens, we're MERV 13 now filters across our district. It's an added cost to our budget, probably $40,000 a year that we have to look at. And we've put that request in to be able to sustain that moving forward. Because we were using MERV 8 filters primarily throughout the district. Now we're fully MERV 13. And so we know it's a cost that's going to, be sustained for quite some time. But that's one example. There's many other areas like that.
And the additional utilities costs too for doing those might be something to kind of earmark for expenditures.
Absolutely. General fund impact right there. So we have been very aware of how much savings we've gained. We've been fortunate, obviously, with the pandemic and not having staff and students in schools. But now that we're running systems longer, we're going to start to see, we're tracking that. We have an energy resource manager. His name's Matt Lichtenfels. Very, very, he's a great professional, and he's doing a great job at monitoring that for us. Any other questions from the committee? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. And if there's anything else from federal support, ESSER funding, happy to take those questions, but Reno, we definitely noted we were going to have Steve Langford to talk IT at the next BAC meeting.
Thanks.
Yep.
So our last kind of topic we had on the agenda here was just looking ahead at next year. We have a draft list of the BAC dates. And the reason this is a draft is because these dates typically follow the school board meetings, and those dates have not been finalized yet. So until those get finalized, this isn't finalized technically, but this is probably what we're looking at for the dates for next year. So if you're interested, and we can send these out too as follow-up. And then that was really it for topics here, unless anybody has anything else, any questions or, any suggested topics for next month. We're going to talk about IT and then anything else anybody's interested in.
Talked about the kind of mapping for the next bond, kind of looking at that schedule. We'll have that as an agenda item. And we also talked about having our meeting at ACMA. And so we will, for our location, we will have that there, and incorporate another walkthrough for everyone just to kind of look at that finished product. I think that's a great recommendation.
A question on, we've talked a couple of times about the concept design starting on Raleigh Hills. What's the status of that project? When will it be bid or awarded?
Yeah, great question. I can answer that. So we put out an RFP and that solicitation is open right now, but we did receive quite a few really good proposals last week. So there's a proposal review committee and we're going through and reviewing those proposals right now. I think next week we'll shortlist people for interviews, and then kind of mid-May we'll do interviews and then move on to contract award. So we expect to have the contract awarded near the middle to end of June.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, it's moving along well.
One other final question from me. I may have mentioned this before, but we're winding down on the 2014 bond. And in anticipation of questions that might come up, particularly as we consider new bonds, do we have a scorecard that lists out what the plans or promises made for that 2014 bond and what we accomplished, so that if somebody says, okay, we gave you $650 million 7 years ago, what have you done with it? We can say, we did exactly what you were doing. And I'm particularly interested in that from the Bond Accountability Committee, because we're overseeing this. If somebody asked me that right now, I'd have to dig to be able to come up with the answer. So maybe in the next meeting, you could give a handout or something to us that would, at least hit the high points for what we've done with that money.
Jake, that's a great question. And John, I just think you just got your project identified for the next month.
Yeah, I know. I pretty much already have like half that put together. So yeah, that we could definitely throw that together.
And additionally, Dick, our communications team has put together, in preparation for knowing that we're going to go out for another bond, our communication team put together a summary of 2014 bond. Some very great, easy to look at graphics that talk about where did your bond dollars go. And we have an overall program summary that we can share with you. We also have by school hitting the different buckets in the bond on what each school received. So we can share those products with you at the next meeting.
Good. I actually did go online and I can go to each school and see what's completed, but that's really down into the granular level, and I never found anything that was up at the summary level. So I'll look forward to seeing that.
We can present that to you at the next one, no problem.
So Dick, those, just as Josh was mentioning what our CCI department has done, they've done a great job working with Aaron's team and putting those together. Our intent was to put those out last September when school was to be open for our students and families to come back. So we rolled out these posters, and actually were just delivered in the last couple of weeks to all of our schools across the district. So there's one large poster for every school that identifies very specifically what happened at this school, in addition to what happened in the big picture of the whole entire district in those large buckets.
Good idea.
Well, thanks for the feedback, and it's great. I think we're going to have a full agenda for June, and along with it, we got to squeeze in that project tour as well. So we will we will be busy, and that's good. Any other topics that come to mind? And again, if you have anything later, don't hesitate to send us an email or contact us by phone. We'll be happy to take that input. All right, Aaron, I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you all. And I think we are adjourned.